Welcome to worship. We're so glad that you've joined us today. Our reading is from Matthew 14, verses 13 to 21. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Every week as a church, we spend a few £100 on bread. Some of it goes towards feeding people through our soup kitchen, and the rest of the bread is given to people who come to our gate looking for food. Now, I confess that I can be quite cynical about the people at the gate sometimes, because I've spent my whole life on church property. So I've seen charlatans and con artists. I've seen beggars, and I've seen people who need to be believed because their stories are true and real. I've seen food petulantly thrown away because what people really wanted was money. And I've seen blankets that we've just given being sold on the street corners. Yet as a faith community, we remain committed to feeding hungry people. So during our lockdown, our distress fund has provided food to our neighbors and to some communities further away. And even though these are high-risk days, we have some faithful members of our church who come every Wednesday and join some of our staff to hand out food parcels to hungry families. And every Monday and Thursday, members of our staff and some other volunteers also serve in our soup kitchen. And the other day, while I was serving at the soup kitchen, a well-dressed woman pushed into the front of the queue. She was this kind of take charge kind of a person. And I was on crowd control duty, shouting things like, "No mask, no food." But she had no intention of obeying my instructions. I don't think she was hungry at all. She just popped over the road from her workplace to come and pick up a free, delicious mid-morning snack at our soup kitchen. She wasn't going to align herself with the riffraff. She just wanted the soup. So maybe you'll forgive my cynicism, but she is by far the exception. At the moment, in recent days, our stock of tinned food happens to be low. So when people have come looking for food, all we can give them at the moment is just half a loaf of bread. There's no butter, there's no milk, there's no baked beans or anything, just half a loaf of bread. And Sharon was telling me the other day, when she gave this half loaf of bread to a man who had rung the bell, he just immediately sat down on the pavement near our gate and began to eat his unadorned bread, chunk by chunk, mouthful by mouthful, hungry beyond description, beautiful bread broken by hungry hands. It is God's will that hungry people are fed. It is God's will that hungry people are fed. When Jesus tries to get away for some quiet time, this crowd won't leave him alone. They are hungry for more of him. They are hungry for healing. So in this remote place at the dimming of the day, the disciples come to Jesus to say it's supper time, and the people should be sent to the villages to buy some food. I suppose it's the equivalent of ancient takeaways. And Jesus says they don't need to go anywhere. You give them something to eat. And the disciples say, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. But their first word, their first thought is, we have nothing. Technically, it's not nothing. They have, as Winnie the Pooh would say, a little bit of something. But in the midst of such a big need, a few bread rolls and a couple of sardines are as good as nothing. But of course, the miracle in the story is that in Jesus' hands, almost nothing, something so small, can become something unimaginable. I mean that in the truest sense of the word, beyond our comprehension. And the truth is, in my opinion, the truth is all of us really have next to nothing. And I don't mean that materially, because that's patently not true. There are some who have more than others. But in the grander scheme of things, all of our lives are in truth very small. The late Brennan Manning, an alcoholic who struggled all of his life to remain sober, says, we're not as bad as everyone thinks we are. We're worse. The truth of our lives is that we have much more going on in the background than most people know. Now, you might not want to agree with Manning's assessment that we are worse. It kind of goes against the grain of our modern culture's idea of how wonderful we all are. But I think that in a moment of truthfulness and honesty, we can all agree that our lives, like a piece of bread torn from a loaf by a hungry man, is both beautiful and broken. Each of our lives. I don't think any of us are able to claim some perfect great offering. All of our lives are beautiful and broken. Therefore, what we have to offer this great big world, in almost every instance, is really just something small, almost nothing. But this magnificent story reminds us that we live in the company of a God who takes what little we have and what little we are, and he does something extraordinary, something unimaginable with it. Just a few weeks ago, someone in our church messaged me to say that due to the impact of lockdown, that they were unable to pay their usual tithe, and that the best that they are able to do right now is just 5 rand a month. A seeming pittance, quite literally a widow's mite. But friends, oh how beautiful is that little offering in Jesus' sight. Oh, what God of this story today, oh, what God can do, what God is doing, and what God will do with that little gift, that 5 rand. It is unimaginable. We have no idea how he is multiplying it. Henry Nouwen, a beautiful author, he's worth visiting if you don't know him, says, how different would our life be if we could believe that every little act of faithfulness, every gesture of love, every word of forgiveness, every little bit of joy and peace will multiply and multiply as long as there are people to receive it. And that even then, there will be leftovers. So Jesus took bread, he blessed it, and then he broke it, and he gave it to the disciples, and he told the disciples to give it to the people. Jesus never gave out the bread himself. He gives it to us so that we can give it to others. This is a sound spiritual principle from Jesus through us to others. From Jesus through us to others. It is God's will that hungry people are fed. And sometimes we do that with bread.